My name's Elias. I'm 32, and if you'd asked me 10 years ago what I thought family meant, I would have mumbled something generic. Love, loyalty, blood ties. You know, the usual Hallmark stuff. But I've since learned that sometimes family is just the people who feel most entitled to carve pieces out of you until there's nothing left but silence. I was the quiet one growing up, not because I didn't have things to say, but because in our house, silence was safer. Every time I tried to speak up, I got the same line. Elias, you're too sensitive. Toughen up. That phrase was practically stitched into the curtains. My sister, Tessa, on the other hand, could break a window and get a cookie. She had this magnetic pull over my parents. She cried. They caved. She failed out of college twice, got married 3 times, never worked a stable job in her life. But somehow, she was always the golden one. And me? I was the family ghost, quiet, consistent, invisible unless they needed something fixed. I moved out at 19 and never really looked back. Got a scholarship, worked part-time jobs, pulled all-nighters in windowless basements to get through school. I never expected handouts. Didn't even ask for help when I knew the college fund my grandfather left for me mysteriously vanished around the time Tessa started planning her second destination wedding in Maui. I didn't fight it. I just swallowed it like everything else. Sensitive boys don't cause scenes. Still, I kept in touch. Birthday calls, polite Christmas cards, the occasional polite family Zoom. I flew home twice a year, paid for my own ticket, stayed in cheap motels even though there was technically a room available for me back at the house. That was until the year I came back and found out that my room, my childhood bedroom, the one with the faded space mural I painted in 8th grade and the bookshelf Grandpa helped me build, had been cleared out and refurnished for Tessa's Labrador, Oliver. Oh, come on, my mom had said when I paused in the hallway, looking in. Don't be dramatic. You haven't lived here in over a decade. It's just a dog. She said it so flippantly, like she hadn't just erased the last physical piece of my childhood and handed it to a shedding mutt who chewed through books for fun. And I, like always, just nodded, smiled, said I understood. I didn't even bring it up again when I had to sleep on a blow-up mattress in the laundry room while Oliver got a Tempur-Pedic and an air purifier. The final straw should have been when I learned they'd drained the last of my college fund to help pay for Tessa's 3rd wedding. Not her first, not her second, her 3rd, a ceremony she decided to hold in Italy. When I asked, very calmly, how that fund, which had my name on it in the will, ended up covering custom embroidered napkins for a reception I wasn't even invited to, Mom sighed like I was a burden and said, "We figured you wouldn't mind. You've always been so frugal." Frugal. That's what they called struggling through college with boxed pasta and thrift store shoes. And again, I said nothing. I felt like I couldn't afford to say anything without becoming the villain. But when I found out about the medals, something cracked. My grandfather, Mom's dad, was the only person who made me feel seen growing up. He took me fishing when I was little, taught me how to sand wood. He was the one who pulled me aside when I was 16 and whispered, "You're not too sensitive, Eli. You just feel the weight of things that other people drop." When he passed away, he left me his old workshop tools, his books, and most importantly, his war medals. He served in Korea. Not that my parents ever talked about it. Grandpa was quiet about his service, but he kept the medals in a wooden shadow box on his bookshelf, one he built himself. It was his pride. And when I visited last, a year after his funeral, Mom had offered me a Tupperware container with some of his stuff in it. No medals, no box. "We must have misplaced it," she'd said. I believed her, like a fool. Then last week, scrolling Facebook Marketplace out of boredom, I saw them. The medals. Grandpa's exact set. Same scuffed bronze star, same faded ribbon on the Good Conduct Medal, same misspelled label on the back of the display box that read Sergeant Harold R. Lane. They were listed under an anonymous seller, but the background of the photos gave it away, my parents' living room. That cheap lace curtain. That yellowing armchair. I stared at the listing until my hands shook. $20 for the whole thing. $20. I didn't text. I didn't call. I booked the flight. It was a red-eye into their state, the kind of trip I never took anymore, not unless someone was in the hospital. I didn't pack much, just a messenger bag, my laptop, and a fire building in my chest that hadn't been there in years. I didn't even tell them I was coming. I landed at 7:40 a.m., rented a car, and drove straight to their house like a man possessed. I didn't even stop for coffee. My parents live in this picturesque suburban neighborhood with mailbox flags and perfectly trimmed hedges, the kind of place that looks peaceful from the outside but feels like a mausoleum inside. When I pulled into the driveway, Tessa's car was already there, her vanity plate, W1N3LUVR, shining in the morning light. Figures. She'd always find a way to be around when drama wasn't hers to clean up. I sat in the car for a full minute before stepping out. Heart pounding, hands shaking. I rang the doorbell, then walked in without waiting. The door was unlocked. My mom looked up from the kitchen table, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Elias, she blinked. What are you doing here? Dad was on the couch. Tessa was drinking from a mug that said, "World's best aunt," even though she once told me she never wanted kids because they're too needy. Oliver, the Labrador, was sprawled on the couch cushions like he owned the deed to the place. I looked around the living room, and sure enough, there it was. The shadow box. Grandpa's medals. Sitting on a side table next to a bowl of potpourri like some dusty thrift shop prop. I walked over and picked it up. The moment my fingers touched the wood, my mom's voice sharpened. "Don't do this," she said quickly, standing. We were going to take the listing down. Someone flagged it, and I turned to face her, holding the box like it might disintegrate. "You were going to sell his medals. For $20. It wasn't about the money," Dad muttered from the couch. "We just thought someone might appreciate them more. You don't exactly visit." I laughed. I actually laughed. The sound came out jagged, like it didn't belong to me. "I don't visit because you gave my room to a dog and used my college fund to buy Tessa a horse-drawn carriage." "Elias, don't be so sensitive." Mom snapped, and there it was again, that line. Like a reflex they couldn't unlearn. Tessa finally stood. "Can we not do this now? It's way too early for another Elias meltdown." Something in me unraveled right then. The quiet part of me. The version that had always backed down, that swallowed disrespect like vitamins. I didn't even raise my voice. I just set the shadow box down, gently, on the coffee table, reached into my bag, and took out a folded manila envelope. Their eyes shifted to it immediately. Mom frowned. "What's that?" I looked her in the eye, and for the first time in my life, I felt something settle in me. Calm, cold, certain. "This," I said. "This is what changes everything." The silence that followed was different. Not the usual awkward hush that came when I visited, where we all pretended to be a family for 24 hours before I went back to my life, and they went back to forgetting I existed. No, this was the kind of silence that felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Mom crossed her arms. "Elias, if this is about money." "It's not about money," I said, cutting her off for the first time in probably 2 decades. My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. "It's about what respect looks like. It's about the fact that you didn't just sell a piece of metal. You tried to sell the one thing I had left from the only person in this family who didn't treat me like I was defective." Dad's mouth opened, then closed again. Tessa snorted. "Wow, drama much." I ignored her. Instead, I stepped around the coffee table and held the envelope out to my mother. "Take it." She didn't move at first. I could see the suspicion in her eyes, like she expected it to explode or contain glitter or maybe even a subpoena. But finally, she reached out and took it. She opened it slowly, pulling out the neatly folded stack of papers inside. "What is this?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "Bank statements," I said, "from Grandpa's estate account." She blinked. Dad sat up straighter. I continued. "You told me the college fund was gone. That Grandpa must have forgotten to finalize things. That there wasn't anything left." But I started wondering, why would a man like him, a man who wrote down every gas purchase and kept every Home Depot receipt in triplicate, forget to lock in his grandson's college fund? Tessa's mug hit the coaster a little too hard. "So," I said, walking back to the shadow box and picking it up carefully. I requested copies of his final banking records. Took a while. Had to talk to his lawyer, jumped through some hoops. Turns out, the fund was intact until the month after he passed. That's when a large transfer was made to a joint account. "Yours, Mom. The same account you used to pay the Italy villa." Her face flushed. "Elias, I held up a hand. "Don't. Please. Just don't. You don't understand." She tried again, desperation rising. "Your grandfather. He was old. He didn't know what he was doing at the end. He wanted to help Tessa." "No," I said, looking at her with something like pity. "He wanted to help me. He told me so. In his last letter." That was my second surprise. I pulled it from my jacket pocket, a faded envelope with my name written in Grandpa's neat cursive. I didn't hand it over, just held it up like a final piece of evidence. He left me a letter, I said, telling me to be patient. That one day I'd need to stand up for myself, and when that day came, I'd know. I saw something flicker in my dad's eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. You went through his stuff before I got there. I continued. You found the will, you saw the letter, and you buried it. You told me he left no instructions, that there wasn't much of value. And now, you're selling his medals like they're old action figures from the attic. Mom tried again. Elias, honey, listen. No, I said, stepping back. You listen. And I turned to my sister. Tessa, I said, you've burned through 3 husbands, 2 degrees, and now, my college fund. You've taken everything that wasn't nailed down, and then some. But this is where it ends. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. What are you going to do, sue us? I smiled. No, I already did. Her smirk vanished. I turned to my mom again. That envelope? It's not just bank statements. It includes a notarized statement from Grandpa's lawyer. Turns out, he did finalize the beneficiary paperwork, just never told you. I was named the primary heir to the remainder of his estate. Dad stood now. That's absurd. Which means, I continued calmly, that every dollar in that account after he passed was misappropriated, which is a nice way of saying stolen. Mom paled. But the account was in my name. Joint, I said, but the funds were his. You were only on the account to help him manage things. And you used it for a wedding I wasn't even invited to. The room spun in slow motion. Tessa looked like she'd been slapped. Mom reached for the edge of the table to steady herself. Dad sat back down like the wind had been knocked out of him. And I wasn't done. The lawyer sent a formal demand letter last week. You probably haven't opened it yet. He said it was signed for, though. I have the tracking number. Mom opened her mouth, but no words came out. I'm not asking you to give back the money, I said. I'm forcing it. If you don't respond by the end of the week, we go to court. I have every record, every transaction, every text where you told me the fund must have evaporated. And I have Grandpa's letter. I set the shadow box down gently again. That's what this is about. Not revenge. Not money. Respect. And closure. Tessa's voice was quiet now. You'd really go to court? Against your own family? I met her eyes. I've spent my whole life believing I was too sensitive. That speaking up made me the problem. But I finally realized the problem wasn't that I felt too much. The problem was that none of you felt anything. And with that, I turned and headed toward the door. I heard Oliver bark once, like he sensed the tension too. Or maybe he just wanted a treat. As I reached the threshold, I paused. Oh, and the medals? I said without turning around. I'm keeping them. They were never yours to sell. I walked out, sunlight hitting my face like a cleansing wave, and closed the door behind me. The sound echoed like punctuation. The ending wasn't clean. I knew the legal battle ahead would be long and exhausting. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I had truth. I had Grandpa's words. And I had finally found my voice. I didn't cry until I reached the rental car. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some long-buried fantasy of Mom chasing after me in tears, apologizing, begging for forgiveness, telling me I mattered. Or maybe just silence. But what I got, sitting there behind the wheel with Grandpa's shadow box buckled into the passenger seat like a fragile passenger, was a flood of emotions so layered I didn't even try to name them. Grief, anger, relief, rage, vindication. All of it hit me at once, hard enough to leave me breathless. My hand stayed on the steering wheel for 10 full minutes before I started the car. I drove aimlessly for a while, through the neighborhood, past the park where Grandpa used to take me on early morning walks before the sun got too high. The bench where we used to sit was still there. I parked across the street and just watched it for a while. I hadn't realized how much I missed the quiet until that moment. The kind of quiet that didn't ask me to shrink. That didn't call me too sensitive. Eventually, I checked into a cheap hotel. It was the same one I always used whenever I had to come back, more out of habit than preference. The wallpaper was still peeling in the corners, and the front desk guy still had the same blank stare like he'd seen too many long nights and too few happy endings. But it was mine for the night, and more importantly, it was not theirs. That evening, I placed the shadow box on the small dresser, propped it up against the wall, and stared at it like it might blink or talk or whisper something only I could hear. It was surreal, seeing something so full of meaning treated so carelessly by the people who claim to honor his memory. But it was mine now. It always should have been. I opened Grandpa's letter again. I'd read it a dozen times, but this time, I read it slower, let the words sink deeper. His handwriting was neat, deliberate, like always. He'd written it a few months before he passed, when his hands were already shaking too much to hold a cup without spilling. He had to have spent hours on it, steadying each stroke just so I could read it clearly. Eli, if you're reading this, then they've probably already disappointed you again. I hate that I can't be there to stand in the gap like I used to. But son, there's something I need you to understand. The way they treated you, it was never about you. It was about them, their fears, their insecurities. You scared them because you felt too deeply, thought too long, and cared too much. They'll never admit that, but I need you to know, you were never too sensitive. You were just too real for people who only knew how to pretend. I left what I could for you. It's not much, but it's yours. Use it how you see fit. And if you ever find yourself wondering whether to stay quiet or speak up, speak. Loud if you have to. Grandpa, I sat there for a long time after that, just holding the letter. I'd spent my entire childhood, and most of my adulthood, convinced that maybe if I just tried harder, worked longer, kept my head down, they'd finally love me the way they loved Tessa. That if I gave enough, stayed out of the way enough, I'd be good enough. But now I saw it clearly. They never wanted me to be seen. They wanted me to be useful. The second I stopped being useful, or worse, started asking questions, I became inconvenient. Disposable. That realization didn't sting as much as I thought it would. If anything, it clarified everything. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer it right away. I let it ring out, watched the voicemail icon pop up, and then curiosity got the better of me. It was my father. His voice was tight, controlled, the kind of tone he used when he was trying to pretend nothing was wrong, but couldn't quite hide the panic underneath. Elias, we got the papers, and I think you've made your point. But let's not make this ugly. There's no need for lawyers or courtrooms. I know you're upset, rightfully so, but your mother is very emotional right now. And Tessa's, well, she's pregnant again. We just want to move past this. If you'd consider coming over to talk, maybe we can resolve things like adults. I listened to it twice. Pregnant again. Of course. Resolve things like adults. As if I hadn't spent years trying to do exactly that. As if I hadn't already tried every path that didn't involve fire. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I called Mr. Levin, Grandpa's old lawyer. He'd retired a few years back, but agreed to help with the estate because, in his words, your grandfather was one of the only decent men I've ever met. I told him what happened. The confrontation. The voicemail. The guilt-laced olive branch. He sighed heavily on the line. I've seen this kind of thing more times than I can count, Elias. They never expect the quiet ones to push back. And when you do, they scramble. Try to turn your boundaries into threats. Should I meet with them? I asked. There was a pause. I won't tell you what to do, Mr. Levin said gently. But remember, this isn't just about one conversation. It's about the pattern. Are they trying to make amends? Or just trying to stop you before the consequences land? That stuck with me. Later that afternoon, I went out to the local strip mall and got a small storage unit. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep the shadow box, the letter, a few keepsakes, and a stack of printed documents. It wasn't home, but it felt safe. A place where no one could throw out my things or sell them to strangers. That night, I got another call. This time from Tessa. I let it go to voicemail again, but she didn't leave one. Just a missed call and a follow-up text. Can we talk? No drama. Just you and me. No drama. From Tessa. I stared at that message for a long time. Because deep down, I knew something had shifted. She didn't want to talk. She wanted to stop me. And I was just starting to wonder what she'd do to try. I didn't respond to Tessa's text right away. I needed time. Not to calm down. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. Focused. I needed time to decide what this version of me, one with boundaries and a spine, was going to do next. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk around the old neighborhood. It was eerie how little had changed. Same cracked sidewalks, same overgrown hedges where the Martin kids used to hide during hide and seek. The world had moved on, but the ghost still lived here. I passed the house I grew up in, slowing just enough to look at the window that used to be mine. The curtains were new, but the room still looked the same size from the outside. Smaller than I remembered. I went back to the hotel, showered, shaved, and changed into clothes that didn't make me feel like a guest in my own skin. Then I called Tessa back. She picked up on the second ring. Eli, she breathed, like she'd just run a mile. I didn't think you'd. Where? There was a pause. You mean to talk? Yes. Where? She hesitated again. Can we meet at the house? Just us. Not mom and dad. That alone told me everything I needed to know. No, I said. Neutral ground. Cafe Amara. For PM. Seriously, she huffed. That place doesn't even have parking. Then we're flats. I hung up. Cafe Amara was small and quiet. The kind of place where people sipped their drinks instead of slurping them, and nobody played music too loud. I got there early, sat at a table near the back, and ordered tea. Not because I wanted it, but because I didn't want to sit there with nothing in front of me. Tessa showed up 10 minutes late, as usual, wearing sunglasses like she was hiding from the paparazzi. When she pulled them off, her eyes were rimmed red. Oh good, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. You picked the one cafe in town that smells like lavender and old books. I didn't answer, just waited. She leaned forward. Look, I know things have gotten tense, but we're still family. Are we? She blinked. Of course we are. You used my college fund. 3 times. Lied about it. Then laughed when they gave my bedroom to a dog. That was Mom's idea, she said quickly. You didn't object. She fell silent. I continued. And you were fully okay with them selling Grandpa's medals. Something you knew he left for me. You think I wanted that to happen? She asked, her voice climbing. I told Mom not to list them. I said it was a bad look. That's not the same as caring. She scoffed. What do you want from me, Elias? A confession? A breakdown? Fine. I messed up. We all did. But dragging us to court? That's insane. What's insane, I said coldly, is pretending nothing happened. What's insane is rewriting history every time someone calls you out. I'm done being rewritten. She slumped back in her chair. I'm not trying to destroy anyone, I added. I'm trying to reclaim what's mine. And Grandpa's. That's all. And if Mom has a heart attack over this, she snapped. If this stress sends her to the hospital, you'll live with that. She's an adult, I said evenly. She made her choices, and she can face the consequences. Tessa's jaw clenched. She said she'd give you back the money. Quietly. No lawyers. I raised an eyebrow. And she wants it to go away. It won't. Silence hung between us for a while. Then she leaned forward again, dropping her voice low. There's something you don't know, she said. I tilted my head. She glanced around the cafe, then whispered, they didn't just take the money from your fund. They took more. Grandpa's lawyer. He gave them access to other parts of the estate. Parts you were supposed to get. Explain. She bit her lip, hesitating. You remember the cabin? She said finally. The one Grandpa used to take us to every summer? I nodded slowly. He left that to you too. In the original will. I overheard them talking about it after the funeral. They forged a transfer. Refiled some documents. Put it in Mom's name. I stared at her, ice settling in my chest. You're lying. I'm not, she whispered. I didn't want any part of it, Eli. I didn't touch the money. But they said, Mom said, you wouldn't even care. That you'd never check. My heart pounded. I hadn't even thought to check on the cabin. I assumed it had been sold or passed along without drama. I never imagined they'd go that far. How do you know this? I asked. I found the old will, she said, before they burned it. I took a photo. You have it. She nodded. But you have to promise not to go after Mom too hard. I narrowed my eyes. Seriously, she said. Just get what's yours. Don't try to ruin her. You don't get to set terms, I said. Not anymore. She sighed. Fine. I'll email it to you. I stood. Do that. And tell her I expect a call. One she doesn't hang up on. I left her there, slumped in the cafe seat, sunglasses off, mascara slightly smudged. For once, she didn't have a quip. That evening, the email came through. A clear photo of the original will, signed and notarized, leaving the cabin, the medals, and the estate balance to me. All of it. Dated 6 months before Grandpa passed. I forwarded it to Mr. Levin. Within 24 hours, the court paperwork was updated. Fraud, forgery, misappropriation of assets. We now had a case that extended beyond simple theft. This was deliberate, criminal deception. The first call came from Mom. She didn't sound angry or apologetic. She sounded tired. I always knew you'd turn on us, she muttered. You never understood loyalty. You mean obedience, I said. You'll ruin the family name. No, I said. You did that the second you sold his medals for 20 bucks. She hung up. 2 months later, court began. It wasn't a public trial, just hearings, legal motions. But the outcome was decisive. The judge reviewed the evidence, especially the will, and ruled in my favor. I was granted full restitution, the remainder of the estate, repayment of the college fund with interest, and legal ownership of the cabin. The forged documents were voided. The medals were returned under court order, though I already had them by then. Mom and Dad didn't look at me once during the final hearing. They didn't have to, because this time, I was the one doing the leaving. Afterward, I drove out to the cabin. It hadn't been touched in years. Overgrown grass, dusty porch, but the foundation was solid. The walls still smelled like cedar and old books. Grandpa's favorite chair was still in the corner, covered in a sheet, untouched by time. I spent the next 6 months restoring it, by hand, with Grandpa's old tools, piece by piece. And when it was done, I mounted the medals, his medals, on the wall above the fireplace. Not to show off, not to gloat, but because they were finally home, just like me. That was 2 years ago. I haven't spoken to my parents since. Tessa sends a card every Christmas, nothing handwritten, just her name in a printed font. I never reply, because sometimes the best revenge isn't a big scene or a dramatic speech. Sometimes it's just this: living your life on your terms, without ever needing their permission again.